was 5 years old, and my father had to reach into a scrum of boys and pull me out. Now, 47 years later, the Bronx is still in me, but I've also learned 3 important principles that I've gathered from research and field tested. And they are that you need to understand vulnerability, inclusivity, and presence. Vulnerability. Now, I grew up, again, on the streets of the Bronx. Given my role right now, I call it the multicultural school of hard knocks. And I also grew up with 4 really boisterous brothers, and an old man that believed that sparing the rod went against the will of God. And if that wasn't enough, I decided to join the army. So I had accrued an incredible amount of armor because I had this false belief that vulnerability equaled weakness. That was until I ran into my daughter. Now, she came home from college as a freshman recently and had a conversation with me. Dad, I'm traveling around the world. I was like, that's great. Now, that shouldn't have been a surprise to us because before she was even born, right, in the womb, we've been telling her stories, right? Stories that would liberate her. Narratives about women going to Mars, creating change, just innovating. And yet here it was. Where are you thinking of going? Not sure. Thailand? Turkey? I was hoping Tallahassee? Tampa? She gave me that look. Dad, don't go there. And of course, I went there. Why don't you go to England? I mean, you love Harry Potter, right? She remained silent. I was like, I'll try a different, more direct route. You know, your mother's a real worrier. Now, that's classic strategy, right? One parent blames the other one or uses the other one as a foil. Inside, the lizard brain started rising. Now, we all have this reptilian brain inside of us, and it's triggered by all these chemicals that we really can't control. You're being a sexist. I'm a woman, and because I'm a woman, you don't think that I should go and travel the world on my own. If I was a boy, you wouldn't have this conversation, would you? Huh? She threw a whole bunch of other huns in there and a lot of sass that I can't act out here. That was a lot. Did she just say she's a woman? Sexist? Me? I'm the chief diversity officer. I live and breathe and lay awake at night thinking diversity, equity, gender equality. Me? A sexist? I mean, I even have a title that says how woke I am, right? So I had a choice. I could armor up, armor in this hand, reptilian brain in this hand, and go in, or I could drop both and step in with vulnerability. Lead with my belly exposed. What Brené Brown, foremost researcher on vulnerability, tells us to do if we are to be authentic in the way we engage with each other. So, I started the conversation. You know, and she already armored up. She was ready to go to Fight Club. You're right. I am being sexist. And if you were my son, I would be running into that closet, digging through some old bag, looking for my old army compass to give to you, and trying to help you out. It's not fair. It's not. It sucks. And yes, you are a woman. And yes, the world is unfair. And yes, I am your dad, and this is no longer theoretical. This is you, and I am so scared, and I love you. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out this long breath. We had one of the best conversations that we've had in a very long time. And it was because I chose to drop the armor, drop the lizard brain, and walk in with vulnerability. Now, vulnerability isn't just about dropping your armor at the door. It also is about creating safety for others. And what does that mean? Well, safety is about making sure that people can come into a conversation in a way that brings their full humanity into the room. Now, normally, we don't worry about other people's safety. We worry about our safety. Again, the lizard brain speaks for us. And most of us in this room don't have to worry about walking around the bend and having someone physically assault us. But we do lose safety when we get that email or that social media text that gets us all riled up, right? Chemicals flush out, the reptile rises up in us. So how do you know when safety isn't present? Because as much as we need to sort of have these skills, they're fundamental, and yet they're fundamentally missing from the way we engage each other. Well, you know you're not in a safe environment and you're not creating safety if three things aren't visible. And those three are that you're masking, right? That you are warping reality. The other side is that you're creating a situation where it's potentially violent, either physically or metaphorically. And how do you know you're in that space? Well, at that point, you're labeling, you're attacking, and you're trying to control. So two researchers, Gurney and Patterson, talk about this spectrum. On one side is silence, on the other side is violence. And guess where courageous conversations are? Right here. And that is why it is so hard. Inclusivity. Why is inclusivity so key to having a courageous conversation? I want these guests right here, these four guests, I want you to think about them as representing the world that we know. And I want these five guests here to represent the things that we don't know about the world. So where does that leave the rest of you? You represent the things that we don't know. Imagine if we could tap all of that cognitive diversity, all of that life experience that this entire room brings to the table. Think of the possibilities. Think of the wacky, out-of-the-box ideas that would be on the table if we could tap into that. Of course, it won't happen if we don't create a safe space. It won't happen if we don't create the opportunity for inclusivity. The other thing we need is presence. Now, most of us live our lives in the past or the future. A past we can't control anymore. It's gone. And a future that doesn't exist. So why are we worried with it if it doesn't exist? It's because it's so difficult in the moment because safety is not present and inclusivity isn't present. Patterson and Gurney also talk about the three clever stories that we tell ourselves in order to not be present and engage in courageous conversations. The first story is the victim story. The reason I am where I am right now is because of some past injustice. The second clever story we tell ourselves is the villain story. My life would be okay if it wasn't for you. And of course, we take a human and we create them into a cartoon because dehumanizing someone allows us to do what to them? And the third clever story we tell ourselves is, oh, woe is me. I call this the Eeyore story. We are hopeless, and we might as well not try. Now, at the same time, there are 3 questions that we can use to unlock these stories and unlock ourselves from these 3 clever stories. The brain is an amazing engine at solving problems. You give it a question, and it will constantly churn trying to look for the solution. So the first thing we do is we ask ourselves, what role am I playing in the situation that I'm in? Turns the victim into an enabled person. The second one is, why would a reasonable, rational human being act this way? We take the villain, unmask the cartoon, and give them a sense of humanity and complexity. And the third question that we ask ourselves is, what can I do right now to put me on the path to where I want to go? You don't have to solve everything. You just have to find the one thing that you can do now. Everyone can do one thing right now. That takes you from helpless to able. So great, you've got it all together. Now you've got to put it in a box and bring people in, which is the most difficult part of all. Now that you have vulnerability, you have inclusivity, and you have presence, you have to enact it, and you have to practice it. The world comes to us, and we create our worldviews based on how the world comes to us. How the world comes to us arises in language. And it is through language that we are able to communicate our differences and the different ways that we see the world. These 3 things, vulnerability, inclusivity, and presence, are key to unlocking our ability to have courageous conversations. And with that, I'll leave you with an old term that I picked up in the Army, which is, in order to embrace the suck of the now, we need to engage in courageous conversations. Thank you.